the London Jesuit Centre. My name is John Moffatt, and I'm going to be taking you through some reflections on the big themes that come up during this month of November, the month of the dead, at the end of the church year, and Advent and Christmas, which mark the beginning of a new one, as part of the branch of prophecy and promise. The time of year presents us with four huge topic areas: what it means to be a human and the promise of life after death, the end of the world and the new creation, the ancient hope of God's people for a Messiah, and what they mean today. Jesus as true God and true human, rescuing humanity from sin and death. And those big ideas are not simply interesting subjects for careful intellectual analysis. They connect to things that matter deeply to people and their faith in a personal God who saves. So before we begin our intellectual journey into these topics, I want to reflect on that tension between intellectual analysis and faith commitment, meaning that inner personal dedication to someone or something that we may not fully understand, but which guides and enlivens our practice and the way we think about ourselves and our world. We need a working picture of how that vital inner attitude relates to what we do in the classroom and seminar room, because trying to think well, even academically, about matters of faith will often feel disruptive and disturbing. Disruptive and disturbing, yes, but if carefully done, ultimately enriching. In fact, it is because our religious ideas, stories and symbols have life-giving significance for us that it is important to think about them, especially when they throw up puzzles and paradoxes that disconcert us. We could say theological thinking begins when simple faith is no longer able to answer all the questions that face it. If it does a good job, it will help that simple faith evolve into something more complex, more nuanced, in some ways more fragile, but in others much stronger. Some people we teach will already be asking good questions themselves, and they need good, intelligent answers. Otherwise, they will walk away. Others still need help to see what the deep human questions are, if they are to understand why the claims of the Christian tradition matter at all. So let's look at the journey of faith Christians go through during this 2-month period. In the month of November, Catholic Christians intensify that sense of connection with those who have gone before them in death and the hope in a life that transcends death by visiting graves and praying for the dead. In Advent, they awaken their own sense of personal longing for the return of Christ by re-entering the world and the language of the Jewish prophets. Their imagination is reshaped as they participate in the liturgies and hear words that speak of an ancient longing for God, for the coming of the rescuer, for the coming of the new age. These practices provide a context that shapes the inner world of Christians with a special quality of expectation, helping them recognize their own deep longings and helping them recognize the child Jesus as the fulfillment of a promise and a gift for the world, and more intimately, a gift for them. There is a cyclical process as faith seeks understanding. We begin with a simple religious narrative in which we are at home. Through questioning and inquiry, we uncover a richer narrative. We find ourselves at home in a new way. This is the sort of intellectual and existential journey we are taking our students on. We are opening up new, bigger narrative spaces for them, where they can relate their own experience and questions to the language and the practices of the Christian tradition. We can hope that in that space, many will learn to recognize and value a human and intellectual integrity within the different currents of Christianity, whether they go on to own this as a pathway for themselves or not. For those that do, if we do our work well, this can be a door to a mature faith. They will re-encounter Jesus of Nazareth with a new and mature faith commitment, not just as a complex of ideas, but as a reality in their lives. I said earlier that thinking well and academically about matters of faith can be disruptive and disturbing. It is worth thinking about why this can be so before we embark on the process for ourselves. Perhaps the first and most significant is that it seems to break the spell of a simple devotional life. It raises questions about the symbols, ideas, objects and words that a devotee has taken as foundational to their whole way of being in the world. Where this touches on practice and cultural identity, reactions can be very fierce and feelings can run high, as we can see in the religious reaction to some of Jesus' teaching in the Gospels. Awareness of such angry reactions is itself disturbing. When we explore the development of any faith tradition, we learn that it includes a lot of very human conflict over ideas and practices, a lot of real animosity, winners and losers. To recognize that such elemental human forces and sometimes fallible human reasoning play a part in the evolution of the tradition is disconcerting, especially where the tradition prizes ideals of unity, forgiveness, and compassion. It is doubly disconcerting for a tradition like Christianity that claims ultimately to be guided and inspired by the Spirit of God. But questioning and argument is natural within faith traditions, particularly those which have a lot of written material. Sometimes it leads to a more profound defense of a position, idea, or practice. Sometimes it leads to a new development or interpretation. Both those processes can seem controversial for believers. Changes to what is familiar can feel like an existential threat. Where does this natural questioning begin? Sometimes we find people puzzling over the discrepancies within a tradition and offering different solutions. Over here it says one thing, but over here we have something that looks like a contradiction. Think of Jewish and Christian scholars through the centuries trying to reconcile the two different accounts of creation at the beginning of Genesis, or modern Christians arguing about what St. Paul actually means in the letter to the Romans. Another important source of questioning is when people find themselves having to defend their positions against criticisms from outside the community of believers. In order to have a dialogue, they may have to take on the language of their adversary. That then becomes a part of their own language. This happens a lot in Jewish, Christian, and Islamic writing. This gives us a third reason why the intellectual journey of understanding a faith tradition is disturbing. We discover that no tradition develops in splendid isolation from all other systems of human thought and belief. Every faith tradition evolves in dialogue with the surrounding culture. As we explore the central ideas of mainstream Christianity, we shall have to take on board how much of the language of those ideas drawn from the wider scientific and philosophical culture of the Greek-speaking Eastern Mediterranean world comes into it. All this means hard work. We have to try to understand the backstory behind heavy-duty words like incarnation, hypostasis, consubstantial, logos. We have to go deeper, even into more familiar words like soul and body. This will help us get a deeper feel for Christian ideas about the afterlife and Jesus as the Son of God. This step is a sort of translation from the past and enables us to bring those ideas from the tradition into a living relation with the language and culture, the science and the dominant beliefs of our times. A friend of mine once sent me a postcard of a class of glum-looking primary children from the Austria of the 1920s. The captions read, "Teachers are people who help us solve problems we wouldn't have if it wasn't for them." That's what exploring the story of Christian theology can sometimes feel like as we follow the twists and turns of debates across the centuries. In fact, this is probably one of the most difficult aspects of communicating an intellectually rich understanding of mainstream Christian thought. There's too much stuff to look at that distracts from the power of the basic story. Our challenge as educators is to turn this abundance of material responsibly into digestible, coherent stories built around key concepts that not only retain some intrinsic interest, but help us build up the big picture and connect the Christian story with things of immediate and universal human concern. I will do my best with that material and hope that my approach, though it necessarily cuts a lot of corners, will enrich your own theological narrative and help you select the fragments that will be enlightening for your own students. In the next episode, then, we shall start this journey with a very fundamental pair of ideas: death and the afterlife. Thank you for listening, and until next time.